Used throughout the world, Bedmax is the UK's foremost manufacturer of tailor-made horse shavings. Bedmax is a very high-quality bedding made from British pine, and this bedding provides a healthy, dust-free, stable environment, combating common health and welfare issues associated with the stabled horse. Bedmax is designed to maximise cushioning for joints, minimise moisture that can damage hooves, and provides maximum comfort and support. For more information, go to bedmaxshavings.com.
Oh God, it's so exciting. Happy Hail Bob Day.
It is a happy Hail Bob Day.
Hello, the Curse of Dam.
It's the best finishing score we've seen at 5-star level.
That was our elo coming into the competition.
Eventing Manager is back.
Best show that we have, Alphabetti Spaghetti.
Looking forward to seeing quality horses.
Still a great day for Ireland.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
I mean, you're a bit of an eventing geek just like us.
And it's time to get on with the show. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast and a When Nicole Met show, very kindly supported by our friends over at Bedmax. Now, the lady on today's show, listeners, I have been asking for a little while. You guys have been asking me for a hell of a lot longer. I'm really sorry that it has taken this long for me to get organised, but we've got her. Ladies and gentlemen, she is consistently inside the world's top 10. She is the individual bronze medalist from the European Championships. Sarah Bullimore, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, we are so pleased to have you with us. Our listeners have been sending me messages every time we go, oh, who would you like on the show? They're like, can we have Sarah, please? Sarah. So I'm delighted to have got you with us, and we are going to pick your brains on your career and a little bit, obviously, about what has been an exceptionally successful season for you. So first of all, let's rewind the clock and go back to when you first realised you wanted to be an event rider. Can you remember when that was, or is it something that you have always wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I think it was something probably from about early teens, definitely. And yeah, just always wanted to do it. And sadly, I never really had the right horse at the right time to be actually doing things at, junior level and young rider. I was always sort of, just about out of juniors, and then I had a horse probably that could have done juniors, and yeah, I was always just slightly behind the curve. Didn't have particularly horsey parents or anyone that was involved really in the sport, so I'm not quite sure how I became so sort of fanatical about it, to be fair, but yeah, it was always something I wanted to do.
I love that. So your parents weren't particularly horsey. So what did they think when you decided that actually, eventing and horses were a career path for you?
Well, basically, I think I thought it was something I was going to grow out of. And they tried to slightly sort of encourage me after GCSEs, and I wanted to go and be a working pupil with Lucy Thompson at the time. And my dad they're quite clever. So he said, well, either you do A-levels or you have to go out and get a job. They weren't going to let me just go and play ponies. So I then figured that actually I'd have more time if I went and did A-levels. I'd actually have more time with the horses than if I had a 9-to-5 job somewhere. So I reluctantly sort of went back and did A-levels, but I was a little bit part-time, and any spare time I had, I was off riding and doing horses. So it didn't really work, but and then when I did leave school and I went to Lucy's, and it was meant to be a one season, and I was there I think for eight years and became her sort of riding manager, and ran all the yard and did a lot of riding for her as well, and did a lot of the backing and all sorts of things, and yeah, basically ran the yard there, and then finally my dad, I think, thought, well, okay, she is committed. I got qualifications, I did my AI, and I think he realised that actually, this was the first time I'd really worked for something, whereas at school I was doing it because I had to. wasn't desperately interested, unless it was subjects. I loved the sciences and things that I could relate to horses, in some way. Yeah, he was kind of like, hang on a minute, she's actually off her own back, putting effort in and working, and he thought, maybe she's not going to grow out of it.
It's here to stay. What influence did Lucy have? Because obviously those early parts of your career, 8 years, I've no doubt you learned a lot. So what influence did she have on what you've brought through as you've gone up the levels and started your own yard and established that and the breeding program and everything?
Certainly in the early years, I did my first 5-star, which was obviously then 4-star, whilst I was with Lucy, and I had a lovely horse as a schoolmaster for a year that I took to Bramham, and then actually we went on to Burley, and we were 10th as our first Burley, and obviously Lucy was a great supporter and showed me the ropes of how it was all done. I started off obviously grooming for her, and so learnt the how to look after an event horse properly, and I was fairly sort of OCD from day one, so even looking after my own horses at home, and I learned at a local riding school. I was livery there first of all, and even though I was livery, I would actually go and do the horse myself, because nobody did it quite right, and it wasn't up to standard. So I was always a little bit OCD about that side of things, but just those extra little bits, and looking after horses' legs, and all those extra bits. And then obviously the training, she was very good on helping me. I had a horse that would have been a bit tricky on the flat, and Lucy was always very good on the flat. So, obviously a lot of help in those days. And then I was sort of ready to set up on my own, and I did go and ride for some people in Gloucestershire for a year. But yeah, I just thought, no, I want to be doing it myself, and just making the decisions, really producing and trying to be the best I could be.
So was that when you set up, because your yard where you are now, you are based in Bedfordshire. So is that where you set up your yard then off the back of a year riding elsewhere, having been with Lucy for 8 years?
Yes, and I moved back to the area, and actually Sarah Whitmore, the dressage trainer, I rented some boxes from her initially. Well, she'd heard that I was back to the area, and she had an event horse, or a horse she wanted to go eventing with, and rang me up, and she had no one riding for her at the time, and she rang me up and said, Sarah, I need you. You must come. So I was going and riding a couple of horses for her, one that she wanted me to event, and a couple of other horses she had in. So I sort of was doing a little bit of freelancing, and here, there, and everywhere, and plus doing mine at home. And Sarah knew I was looking for a yard or somewhere to sort of base myself, and she kept saying, well, there's always the yard here, and it wasn't ideal. It was a little bit further from home than I wanted, but in the end, it sort of all fell into place. So I ended up renting boxes from Sarah and riding this horse for her. But there wasn't a lot of turnout, and it was a little bit tricky. And there's always slight conflicts of interest. And I love to keep my horses as natural as possible and have lots of turnout. And I had a horse at the time that went to Badminton, and then, he was having a holiday, and I was just quite restricted on facilities and things. And so it wasn't going to work out long term. And so I moved back home, but I only had sort of a few stables at home, and again, didn't have the actual riding facilities. So we sort of begged, stole and borrowed quite a lot. And, but, got by. I was lucky enough to have sort of lovely local owners that I rode on and off for, and I'd known them since Pony Club, and And so when I rode their horse, it was quite good because I could actually use their lorry, and I was really lucky to be able to do that. And we just kind of got by. I'd met Brett by this stage as well, so we then rented a little bit further out, and he had a flat in London at the time, and so he was renting that out so that we could go and rent a property. But it's just we sort of just struggled with having sort of enough grazing or the right facilities, so it was a little bit of a sort of tricky time. And in the end, Brett said, this isn't quite right. He said, let's sell the flat and look for somewhere where we can be based properly and it's our own. And there's always sort of favours asked from people that they've got horses at the yard that you're renting, and you're taking responsibility for those as well, and then you're trying to compete, and so there's always a slight sort of conflict. So he said, I've had enough of this, and decided that he would sell his flat and we'd look for somewhere to buy that we could call our own. So that was 2000. We moved to Bedfordshire.
Okay, cool. So you've been there for over 20 years now. At this point, so you're established in so much as you've been riding for a good number of years, and that is a career that you want to make your life around. What was it that drove you at that point? Is it the badmintons, the Burleys? Was it the Olympics? Was it the sort of the process of training horses? What was it that really lit your fire and kept you going?
I've always been very ambitious. I was desperate, to get badminton, Burley, the Olympics, wanted to be on a British team. That's always been the drive, but I haven't always had the horses. I've never had big owners that will go out and spend thousands on horses and such. But I've always, for me, it still is about working with a horse and getting the best out of that horse. You build a relationship and the training, and even just doing the 3-year-olds, the first time they come off the lunge and you have a trot loose around the school, it's like that's a big step. Or then the next day, you teach it a few steps of leg yield, and they suddenly go, oh yeah, okay, I've got that. That still excites me as much. But it's the end goal is still, if I was just doing youngsters, it would probably be a bit boring. I'd be like, oh, come on. So the fact that but it's lovely. You come back from a 5-star, and literally we have a 3-year-old, one of our homebreds at the moment, but literally we've come back from Leon, and I'm like, right, okay, tack on that, learning to long rein, learning to lunge. And I love doing all that and just playing around with them as well. It's all
best of both worlds.
And it's you have I love working with an intelligent horse and watching them learn, and I get as much pleasure from that. But knowing, the end goal is still you want to produce them all the way and at 5-star level. So it's whilst those horses are on that upward trajectory, then I'm happy. But it's a long old wait with a 3-year-old.
It is. It really, really is. Let me ask you about, I guess, one of because you had a good number of horses sort of taking you up the levels initially. There was the lovely Salerno, who I think you did your first badminton on. Was that right?
He was my first badminton for probably a few years.
Okay.
I had ridden at the level with the lovely Ballycotton. First of all, he was my lovely schoolmaster that I had, and he took me around my first Burley and my first badminton. And then I had another horse called Simple Solution, who was a little bit of a runaway, and he did go to badminton as well. But not desperately sort of successfully, and we weren't going to challenge for top placings or anything like that. He was a fab jumper and such, but he was a little bit crazy at times.
At the time that those horses were sort of at the height of their career, there were a couple of younger horses that sort of started to come along in the years that followed in Lily Corinne, who I'll ask you about in a moment. I want to stay with Rev de Rouet for a second, because he's perhaps been the horse up until this year when Corouet has absolutely stepped up to the mark and delivered that championship medal. But he had been your real sort of 5-star campaigner. He's done, I think, has he completed 12 5-stars? He's been top 5 at 4 of them. He's completed every 5-star in the world other than Adelaide. And obviously Maryland has just been introduced, so hasn't had a chance to go there yet. But he's been an absolutely incredible horse for you over the years. Hasn't always been the easiest. Tell us a bit about how you found him, because I think he's one of the most underrated horses in the sport.
He is an amazing horse. So yes, it was literally, so I had Salerno had got to that level, and he was the first horse that I had got back to that level again after sort of a few years of just having a few, without being rude, lovely horses, but not with the talent to go the whole distance. And so Salerno got me back up there, but he was a little bit flamboyant and was always injuring himself because he just was too exuberant. Even if he gave him a 2-foot fence, he'd jump 3'6" over it. So just always put so much pressure on himself. And but yeah, he made me realise, because you've had a bit of a break from it. You think, God, can I still do this? So it was lovely. He relit the fire as such, although it was still burning. But I then had the belief, yes, I can do this. And I was lucky enough to be able to sort of then invest in a couple of younger horses, and we found Blue, as he's known. Rev de Rouet is Blue at home, and we bought him as a 3-year-old. And he was just quietly in the background being produced and just been amazing. I mean, funnily enough, he was fairly easy as a young horse, and all his little quirks and things at the time you would put down to just being a young horse. You would say, well, that's because he's young and he's green. And then it was probably, he went to Lyon as a 7-year-old, and he was a little bit tricky and a little bit funny with the crowd. But again, you kind of think, well, Lyon is a bit like that. It's only the first time that they meet quite that kind of atmosphere, and see that sort of situation. But then he just quietly, as he was from 7-year-old to 8-year-old, he became more and more difficult, and he was quite an odd horse. And I mean, we do still believe he is genuinely autistic. And then you could actually see the things that he did as a young horse. It did all fit into place that actually, yeah, if he was autistic, that would be right. And certain things, you look back and you think, wow, yeah, actually, he's different. He's just different. And so he did take quite a long time to just get into actually learning his trade, and every time you thought you'd cracked it, he'd just throw something different into the works. And he was always a great jumper, and even when he got to 5-star level, he'd go double clear every time, and he'd just be there or thereabouts. He promised so much on the flat, and he just kind of silly little things would, it wouldn't happen. And you're like, oh, we must be able to do something. So we worked hard on the dressage, and then he almost resented it and would have he would bear a bit of a grudge. And if he got into sort of strop about something, and it might not have been anything that had happened that day, even that week. It might have been something, 2 weeks before, and he suddenly would just be like, actually, do you know what? I think that was too much. And he would sulk. And I could come out in the mornings and I'd look in the, see his head over the stable door, or back, because he'd be a shyer horse in those days, and he'd be sort of stand back from the door, and I'd see over the door and think, oh dear, he's not in a good mood. And that would normally coincide with just before you were about to go to a big competition where you wanted him on side and feeling happy and good. But that's sod's law, isn't it? But yeah,
could you get him back on side if he had sort of taken exception to something? Were there any tricks that sort of made you friends again?
No, not really. Not really.
I bet you tried it all.
Yeah, we did try everything. I mean, he could almost be in this sort of a sulk for. I mean, it might last a fortnight. Yeah, it was really weird, and you try and bring him out of it, but he wouldn't let you in. I couldn't kind of quite get in his head. And then, yeah, all of a sudden it clicks, and I mean, he was petrified of crowds, and once he's sort of got in his head that he is scared of something, there wasn't anything that you could tell him. He didn't believe you. It would always be like, who are you to tell me? What do you know? He was always quite just an independent. If he had a worry about something, there was no helping him through it. But yeah, all of a sudden he did realise we could work as a team, and then he did get a couple of good results. And then I think once he realised he'd had a good result, and actually everyone was really happy with him, and he loved the crowds. He still could be a bit spooky with them, but actually he was like, actually they're okay. And now, I mean, difficult old man he's become now. He's if they're not a big enough crowd there, then he's kind of like, well, I'm not performing because there's not enough people here to see me. So yeah, he's a fickle old devil. But I mean, wow, what a horse! He is unbelievable. I mean, he's 17 and he is still like a spring chicken. He trots up as sound as a 3-year-old. He's tough, and yeah, he knows his job now. And it's been really sad for him with the timing of COVID, because having had a 15-year-old that's had a handful of fabulous results at 5-star level, and you think, well, okay, he's got it now. I know how to bring him out to a 5-star and produce him to his best, and he knows what it's all about. How exciting he's got the last few years of his career, with some great things still to come. He's looking like a potential horse, but at that level, the potential to really get some good results. And then suddenly we've basically lost 2 Burleys, 2 Badmintons, and that could have been his time to shine. So yeah, it's a little bit sad. And I mean, okay, we did go to Po last year, and sadly little tack malfunction meant we had to pull up about a third of the way into the cross country. So that put paid to that. But yeah, he's missed a good bit of his life that he isn't going to get back. And okay, he'll aim for badminton next year, and hopefully he's got a good badminton and a good Burley left. But he is 18, and you never know what's anything can happen. So
it's difficult because, like you say, those horses that were sort of going into their sort of 15-year-old year, that were established at that level now and sort of feeling very competitive, actually they've lost a couple of the best years that you would have liked to have had at the 5-star level with them, and it makes it very, very difficult. I mean, looking back at his last, obviously taking Po last year out of the mix, Burley 2019 he was 4th, Le Moulin that year he was 5th, he was 4th at Burley the year prior, he was top 20 at Badminton that year. He was second at Po the year before, where he was so close to the victory on that occasion. You know, he has had just the most, he's been so close that you just feel that surely there is a big one in there for him. Let me ask you about his breeding, because Ballot de Rouet is a sire that now features pretty heavily in your stable, and has been something that Corouet is, I'm right in saying, by Ballot de Rouet as well. There's been a few others. So what was it about that you loved so much?
I don't know really. It's a sort of a love-hate relationship we have with the Ballot de Rouet. At the time, I mean, basically, I saw a picture of Rev de Rouet, and he was actually out for sale. We found him in Holland, although he's German bred. And I just saw a picture of him. I didn't know anything about the breeding, to be fair, but I just saw a picture and thought that's a Sarah horse. He had my name written all over him, and went over and tried him tried him. He was a 3-year-old, so you know, we saw him. He was sort of lightly backed, so I was able to at least sit on him, and obviously brought him home. And again, you know, at the time, yes, jumping sire and all of that, but I mean, to me, he had 5-star written all over him. So just began producing him, and it was actually the following year I had Lily Corinne, who actually came from the same place. And again, I just saw a picture of her jumping, just loose jumping over a fence with her knees up round her ears, and I was like, wow, that's lovely. And it was a rainy day. We'd actually gone for a couple of days break to France with Sarah Cutteridge. She was there, Sarah Cohen. And it was a rainy day, so we were sort of looking on the internet, and that's when I found this horse and just sent a message to the guy and said, would it be similar sort to Rev de Rouet and, you know, good movement, jump? And he's like, yes, of course. So went over, and obviously she came home with us as well. And it was when she was a 6-year-old. You know, she was a beautiful mare. She still is a beautiful mare. Could have done any job. You know, she moved, she jumped, and it was Brett's idea to start the breeding. And you know, why don't we take an embryo off her? So that was what we did, and because I had Blue at the same time, and he was obviously by Ballot de Rouet, I, for some reason, just thought the mix would work. So didn't know anything about Ballot. Ballots do have a slight reputation for being difficult, but you don't really find out about that. And back then it wasn't so widely known. But it's always after you've used the sire you find out these little quirks, however much you look into it. But anyway, yes, we took an embryo from her to Ballot, and obviously then had Corouet. And then it's been a long wait, but I mean he again was a stunning foal, full of character. And he's always been very dominant. He wouldn't be quite as quirky and tricky as Rev de Rouet, but he would be very dominant and very sort of self-assured. But then so would Lily. So he could have got that from either side. So, you know, you can't say, oh, well, he's difficult because of this, or, you know, because of the sire. All of Lily's would be very confident and very sort of self-assured in their own sort of abilities. You know, that could have come from either side, really.
And was it always the plan to keep him? Because obviously you've got a business to run. I know you've had to make some tough decisions in parting with other horses. Was he always one that you thought, you know what, actually I'm going to keep him. I want to see how far I can get him?
I think, yeah, when we had him, he was the firstborn, and Brett had always said, no, we'll keep him. The plan was we were going to go to Leon. So we said, oh, we're certainly keeping him until a 7-year-old, and so he can go to Leon. And, actually he showed his class from day one, to be fair. And even, I was looking for horses for owners, looking at 3-year-olds, and we'd been over to the sales in Ireland. And that was, at the same time as I was sort of backing him, and I'd come home and put him on the long reins and think, I've not seen anything that is half the quality of him. He may be small. It was a little bit disappointing at the time that he didn't grow, and he was tiny when I was backing him as a 3-year-old. He was really tiny, and you just think, God, I hope he grows a bit, but we couldn't see him growing too much. But yeah, the quality was amazing. And then obviously he did his bit as a 3-year-old, and we turned him away again, and then he came back up as a 4-year-old. And I think he went to, I think it was somewhere like Barbary. He did his first young event horse, and we've still got the video clip, and it comes up on my Facebook memories every year. Literally, he comes to the first fence, and Brett was videoing next door to the commentary box, and the judges, and I think no one was really paying much attention. There was a little chestnut in the ring, and he comes down to the first fence and literally jumps the height of the wings over it, and there was this big gasp that went round, and everybody was sort of like, wow. So he had a few followers from that day, but he was always class, and I think he won on that occasion, I think, and qualified for Burghley as a 4-year-old, and he's just gone on from there. As long as people don't discriminate about his size, he's always been in the mix there.
He's got the most enthusiastic fan club going, I think. I mean, people absolutely love him because he is such a character. You can see he's got so much presence about him, and everybody loves somebody that's a little bit smaller. And I'm not calling him an underdog in that respect, but he's that little bit smaller, isn't he? He's a bit more diminutive. He's got that sort of feisty nature about him, and he's so endearing with it. What about the sort of the journey from there? Because obviously he impressed as a young horse. He was top 10 at Le Lion as a 6-year-old, and he went back and went very, very well cross country again as a 7-year-old. The build up the levels. You had ridden Lily Corinne at your first European Championships in 2015 at Blair Castle, where you'd been called up as a reserve. But there had been a number of years whereby you'd been so close. You'd been knocking on the door, you'd been reserve, and it had been, I imagine, a fairly frustrating period. I remember certainly thinking, I don't understand why they're not on a team now after this results. How was it for you, and how hungry did that make you in terms of another championship appearance that we obviously come into a very, very hotly contested 2021?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were a few really, really tough years when you think, goodness, what more do I have to do? And, I've had good horses and sort of been there. And even when, you think this year I'm really close and still you're not picked, it was tough. And certainly even, when people are saying to you, this is your year, and you think, yeah, I think this really could be. And sadly, I mean, I know poor old Rev de Rouet, I mean, realistically, there's been worse horses than him that have been picked for teams. But he was always slightly, because of his quirky past, and, he did have his little incident at Babington a few years back, where he did get a little bit overawed by the crowds and did have a little moment in the dressage. And, people still talk about it now. And I think we're, 6 years ago or something. And, people say, oh, yeah, I remember him. And sadly, it's his notorious moment. And you're like, but he's done so many things since then and proved that he can do it. And he is okay with it now. It's his one little sort of mistake. But it was, I get it, it was quite public. But, forgive and forget, that is well and truly behind him. And so, to be fair, selectors and such obviously wouldn't ever forgive him for that. So I did used to go to team training, and we'd be on the shortlist, but it was kind of like, why am I here? If you're not going to actually ever pick me, I did feel a bit like, why bother going through the motions? And then, there was other years with Lily as well, when I had actually been told I was right up there in the mix, and then the long list comes out and I'm not even on the long list. And, that was really tough, because believing that, having had a really good season, she'd just been placed very well at Le Merlin, and, believing that you were right up there, and, even if you weren't maybe in the top sort of 4 for the team, but certainly, you were there or thereabouts for, the 2 individual slots or whatever. And then I think there was something like 18 or 19 on the long list that came out, and I wasn't even one of them. And that was really tough that year. But, it is always something that I wanted to do, and you just got to keep going. And basically by this stage, I was so determined to keep going and keep doing it and prove everyone wrong. But also, you get to a stage where it's like, well, okay, if I give up now, what else would I do? Because actually, producing horses is what I've done all my life, and actually, I think horses, that they're all happy to go for me, and actually, horses don't ever feel like they're going by force with me, and they're happy to do a job, and actually, it is a partnership, and I still, it is all about building that partnership and teaching the horse that it is fun, and actually, yeah, so it was all, you had to focus on that side of things, that you're producing the horses, rather than get bogged down in why is this not happening, and but yeah, you still keep going. And so it was then Elfie that was starting out at the young horse classes, and it gives you hope for the future as well, because you think, well, there's another quality one coming through. But yeah, it was never, he was being produced for teams all the way along. I kind of had hopes. I mean, okay, yes, Lily got to the Europeans at Blair, but that again was almost slightly by default. Again, we were a reserve, and sadly for one of the guys there, they had an issue with their horse, and then it's always sad when someone has an injury or has an issue for them, because it's someone's joy is someone else's heartache. So that's always tough. But yeah, it was, yes, great for us, but then it was so last minute, and that again was difficult. I didn't have the preparation, and wasn't sort of privy to all the team sort of talking of walking the course, and I kind of dropped in, and literally we arrived, trotted up, and I did dressage literally the next night. It was in like the first 12, I think, to go, and it was a bit of a whirlwind, and yeah, it wasn't the best preparation, and yes, it didn't go horrendously, but it wasn't as good as what it could have been.
How did that feel then coming into 2021? Because you had a great result with a 3rd place finish at Burnham Market back end of last year. It was Corouet's 2nd long format 4-star there. So you'd have felt pretty happy coming into 2021. That being said, there, as we all know, have been so many good British horses in the last year or so, and particularly coming into this year, the strength in depth is absolutely massive. So how was the feeling of pressure? Because the team pressure cooker as such in terms of performance and everything else was quite massive. But I guess the plan was to take him to Bicton for the long format 4-star. So at this point, were you always thinking, okay, the Europeans is this year, this could be a chance? Or had you kind of got to the point of, do you know what? We'll go and do our thing, and what will be, will be?
I think probably because he'd actually come into his own. Last year he started becoming rideable. He went to Lyon as a 6-year-old and he went as a 7-year-old, but he was quite opinionated. And they all have to go through a stage where they're just a little bit difficult. And he chose, I think, 7-8-year-old year for him. I think he won the national championships as a 7-year-old just before he went out to Lyon, and that was almost a mistake as such, because he went to Lyon being Mr. Totally cocky, and thought he was absolutely it. And I mean, literally, even circling around the start box, I know every time he just stuck his head in the air and went, "I'm going now." And I said, "No, come on, we've got to wait for the start." So yeah, he was quite difficult as a 7-year-old, and just the more the crowd cheered and sort of, he thought it was for him. So he did get really cocky and just a little bit silly. And then was quite difficult as an 8-year-old. So although he was classy, he was, he just thought he was in charge. He wasn't really into being a team player together. It was almost, if I took a pole to a fence, he'd stick his face in the air and charge off at it even faster. And certainly he was quite interesting in the Benham show jumping. I think that was his first pole he'd had down at that level, and just because he was absolutely so cocky, he stuffed his head in the air, and I said whoa, and he just was like no, and almost ran into a fence and almost ejected me. There was a lovely picture of me about 2 foot above him. Thankfully we came down together, but I remember thinking, oh goodness, he's quite a long we're quite a long way apart here. But then he landed and carried on as if nothing had happened, and still came to the last 3 fences. And but yeah, he was tricky as an 8-year-old. And then it was lovely. As a 9-year-old, he suddenly went, oh, okay, maybe she does have something to say. Maybe she can help me. And so yeah, last year, just you start to get back on track and where he should be. And he's always showed the class, but you've got to put that on paper as a result. And then he started doing that last year. And yes, certainly I know Burnham Market wasn't the most difficult 4-star, but he was absolutely class around that. So yeah, I came out this year thinking, well, actually he's in a good place. And he was a little bit opinionated in some of the dresser tests at the beginning of this year, and again, it was always, you think, come on, there is an amazing test here, but he'd just have a little say somewhere, or he'd know the medium was coming, and he'd just be like, yeah, I'm going, and set his jaw against it, and just silly little things, which just, yeah, he'd tell the judges how it was. But yeah, so I suppose I did come into this year thinking, well, he's got a really good chance. So it's that carrot again, you're thinking, yeah, dangle that carrot. So, but you never know, because I suppose I've had so many knockbacks from being selected. I was sort of ready if it didn't happen, and kind of just thinking, well, that's fine. I'm keeping producing my horse, but yeah, there's still a bit of you that, you're always hopeful. You've got to keep being positive about these things. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're doing it for you and what's best for your horse.
What about just sticking with the dressage for a moment, because his test at Bergam this year, where you were sub 20, your best ever international score, and actually two of his last 3 outings, I think, have been in your best ever, two of your best ever international tests. So he has absolutely been delivering the scores. But in terms of that test, how did it feel? Did it feel that good? And did you get a chance to enjoy it? Because I remember watching it and thinking, oh, like I've obviously seen him before, but there was something different that just felt like he had this such presence about him. He was so uphill, but you just felt really confident watching him. Did it feel that way to ride it, or were you sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop slightly?
Yeah, no, he did. I mean, there were still things that could have been improved there as well. But yeah, I was chuffed to bits with him there, because actually he was really rideable. And yeah, I halted at the end, and I was like, yeah, brilliant, good boy. That's the first time he'd actually really let me sort of be on side and work completely together. And as I say, there was still bits that could have been improved, but yeah, he was great. So I know I was chuffed to bits with him, and I came out and thought I didn't know. He's a difficult one sometimes, because sometimes judges love him. And, even when he's not been great, the judges, he does move beautifully. So he does get marks, even if he's not as good as, and a lot of things you can feel, but it wouldn't always show. So he is a difficult one to judge. But no, I did think it was a good test, but I didn't know how good. But then when I came out and Brett was like, yeah, it was all right. I was like, oh. Because I thought, well, that felt amazing. He felt really rideable. I was just chuffed with the way he'd actually let me ride him. But yeah, Brett wasn't over enamoured by it, and I was like, oh. So, but yeah, then he got a great score, and Brett was like, oh no, I was wrong. So yeah, no, it was a good test.
Always good when you get them to say I was wrong. I remember being sat next to the scorers in the commentary box, and sort of looking at his score sheets coming in and going, okay, this is a really, really, really smart score. And then messaging you frantically while Echo Ratings sort of bashed a few databases around to see just how good it was, and got very excited. I think I will apologise now for heaping a lot of pressure on you that weekend, because it was mentioned just how many international runs you'd had and how good that score was a number of times. If we just fast forward slightly, because obviously he then gets the call up for the European Championship. So he's in the six. It was a really, really tough squad to make. There were some horses in some very, very good form. What was that feeling like, after everything that you've been through and sort of how close you've been? How did it feel? And where were you?
Wow. Yes. It was an interesting one, to be fair, because we actually had a last minute rerouting up to Blair. So literally roll back to 2015, we were sitting in the lorry, basically in Blair's car park. We'd driven up, as the reserve on the trot up morning, and literally we were sitting in the lorry, and we got the call saying basically you're in for in 2015 with Lily Corinne, his mother. And so this year, yeah, we had rerouted to get a qualification for Leon with another horse. And again, we were sat in the lorry in Blair's car park, and we had the call again. So it was quite, it was quite a sort of poignant moment. And yes, they said you're in the squad, and yeah, I mean, just almost, I think a feeling of relief probably that we'd actually done it finally. And whereas I suppose I've always felt with Lily, it was not that I got there by accident, but yes, a little bit, because it was someone else's misfortune that I ended up there. So to be picked straight out in the six, this time it was kind of, I've done it properly. And he genuinely, he did deserve to be there. But yeah, there were an awful lot of good horses that I thought it would have been tough if he hadn't been there. It would have been tough, but there are so many amazing British combinations at the moment.
I mean, if I were you, Sarah, I would just be hanging out in Blair Castle car park for
Yeah.
I mean, next August, one of the World Championships, middle of September. So that would work about right. That would work okay.
Might have to go up to Blair again.
Hang out in the car park. Brett will be like, "What are you doing?" Oh, just What about just praying to the Cairngorms? What about Evanche in terms of how it played out? Because he put in a superb test on the first day for you. You were part of the team as well. And his performance in the first phase, 22.8, which was his second best international test of his career, and really backed up the previous good scores that he'd had over his last couple of runs. Obviously that sub 20 at Bergen, but then again he did a 24.2 at Hartbury, didn't run, obviously was aiming for Evanche. But how was that sort of feeling after the first phase? You're there, you've worked so hard to get to that point, and actually you're there. And were you able to enjoy it?
Yes, I think the dressage phase. Obviously, you want to do your best, and you want to prove that you should be there. So, but I wasn't so nervous before the dressage actually. And he'd been great. I mean, we'd had it's not, you never get the perfect build up to a competition, and we'd had a couple of sort of speed bumps, and so maybe he wasn't exactly where I wanted him, and he probably wouldn't have had that long travel. It's knowing how much or how little to do with them, and so it's still a learning curve with him as to how much you need to do. But he was amazing. I mean, really rideable, and yeah, fabulous. Again, I was a little bit frustrated because actually, like, his flying changes are his highlights, and they just didn't. I mean, he didn't get bad marks from the test, but they weren't as good as they could have been. So even, yes, it was a great score, and I was happy, but it's like, that still could have been better. His halt and rein back is normally very good, and he was a little bit quick, and but he was fab and rideable and on board. And what's lovely is that you see a lot of horses, they come out the arena, and the crowd cheering and such, and all they want to do is get out of the arena. And certainly still, Rev de Rouet he'll do his test, and then he gets out the arena and he's like, just get me out of here. He wants to go back to stable compound, and then he relaxes and he's happy again. Whereas Corouet just came out the arena on a long rein, and he's just like, yeah, hi fans, yeah, come on, cheer for me, it's fine. And he walked out out the arena like he didn't have a care in the world, and he's just soaking up. He just loves it. He is just such a showman, and it was great. I could actually literally just be buckle end and wander out the arena, and he was happy as well. So really happy in himself, and that was just the icing on the cake, really.
And how about the cross country? Because there was a lot of chat about the cross country beforehand. It was a very sort of twisty, turny track as well. Being small, I would imagine that would suit him in that respect as well. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I mean, it was twisty, and actually, I just felt like I needed to walk and walk and walk, because you could so easily have ended up the wrong side of the string. So I was petrified about going wrong, or just, something stupid. And I must admit, I was the most nervous I think I have ever been in my life before cross country. Not from going out and doing it, but I knew it had taken me 10 years of being a reserve before I've actually, finally got there. And I just thought, goodness, I've been given this chance. Don't mess it up now. So yeah, I will admit to being very nervous, and yeah, not of going and doing the job, because yes, it was twisty, but actually I kind of thought he's the smallest horse here. For him, the twists, aren't bad. If I'd had Red Bureau there, then it would have felt a lot more twisty. But for him, you can pick the tightest line, and it, being small, he's nippy. He can get around those twists and turns a lot easier. And yes, the course was, had a lot of technical things and tricky bits here and there, but there was nothing that I thought for him would be an issue. So there wasn't anything that I was particularly worried about. It was just, don't go and make a stupid mistake now. But yeah, he was amazing.
And what about the final day? Because he was faultless in the show jumping. He's a pretty good jumper, it's safe to say anyway. How did it feel watching yourself move up that leaderboard into a medal position?
I mean, it was absolutely amazing. But I did have a really good feel going into the competition. And that sounds really cocky, but I did feel really confident going there. And Elfie himself, literally, I'm sure he'd known from probably back from Bergen all summer. I think he's known he's been going somewhere, and he's been watching his weight for a start. Normally he's quite a good doer and really easy, and he was just really trim and he was still eating well, but we were like, you can actually be a little bit fatter now. And he's like, no, I know there's something coming up. I'm keeping my racing weight. And he literally the last couple of weeks before a competition with gallop work and such, he does go a little bit, when he's looking lean and fit, he goes a little bit herring gutted, and it makes his saddle really slide back. Well, the girth actually really slide back. The saddle's not too bad, it'll go an inch. So I was trying to keep as much weight on as possible so that, when he got to competition and would then lean up just that little bit more, that my saddle wasn't going to be flying off the tail, because obviously there's not a lot to sit on him anyway, because he's so compact and little. So, we were trying to keep his weight on, but he knew there was something coming on. So he was basically racing weight all summer. And he was absolutely sure he was going. So I don't know, he perhaps gave me the confidence to believe, he knew what it was all about. And show jumping morning, I woke up, had a big breakfast and was quite happy. I was really relaxed from being that nervous on a Saturday. I was really quite laid back on the Sunday. And I did think, well, I am sat on probably one of the best show jumpers, here, and had full confidence in him. And then it was only, I'd spoken to my show jumping trainer who'd been watching the morning, and she then slightly threw me because she said, are you going however many strides from the first to the second? And I said, I was going on the one less. And I mean, she was great, and she said, well, you know him. But then it just slightly put the element of doubt in my mind. So I went back in the lunch break and walked again and thought, goodness, why am I not nervous? And then almost was like, shouldn't I be more nervous here? But also basically because going back to Bergen, we'd had, I think, probably our only fence down this season, which was 100% my fault and basically cost him becoming the British Open champion. So I was slightly sort of still had that in the back of my mind. And it was quite a similar sort of related distance line from the first to the second fence as the one in Bergen, where we had just breathed on the pole. So I was then putting more pressure on myself to jump it clear. But I needn't have worried. But then when I realised I was actually on a 23.6, because we'd had 0.8 time fault from the cross country. So I was on 23.6, which actually was his finishing score at Bergen. And it sounds really stupid, but I knew he'd finish on that score again. So I went into the show jumping and was fairly sort of confident. And I mean, he was pinging.
He certainly looked amazing. What about plans for next year? Because obviously we hope that things will be a little bit more normal in 2022 with a whole host of different events on offer. So what would be the plan with him? The World Championships are in Protoni in Italy in September. So there's an opportunity in the spring, particularly with the hot competition for the British team. Do you have an idea as to what you would like to do with him yet?
Well, we've sort of vaguely been thinking about it. Because obviously Rev Duray will go to badminton, and in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to concentrate on blue at badminton, and it probably isn't ideal to have two there. I mean, in a perfect world, if there was some funding, I would love to take Corouet to Kentucky. But being realistic, that probably isn't going to happen. So, and I would have thought Le Merlin's probably a little bit too late if we're aiming for the Worlds. So, yeah, they probably will both end up being at badminton.
Could be two at the Big B. Before I ask you for one horse to watch next year, which I'll just a little heads up, that's going to be my next question because our listeners love that answer. Just a word on Brett's influence in your career, because he's been a huge part of your success. And, we all know it takes a real army to get to the top and to stay at the top. And I'm sure has been an anchor in times where it's been harder. So what impact has he had over the course of your career?
Well, yeah, he's been, an amazing supporter, and, he is always there for me. And, he's basically, he's not from a horsey background. Basically, when we first met, he was very much a city boy, and, thought that milk just came from Sainsbury's or Tesco, didn't it? It's like, no, it comes from a cow. Oh, really? So, it's not like he's had that sort of grounding in the equestrian side of things. But yeah, he's amazing. And actually, he obviously watches a lot from the ground. So he has become quite a sounding board. And, I would always ask his advice and talk things through. And, if I'm teaching one, say, flying changes or something, I'm always like, can you come and watch this? Tell me if it's clean, and he's like, well, I don't know. He's like, well, you've watched enough, but, he would know, he would know things like whether it's a clean change or, so he is quite good from thought, and he has quite a technical mind, so he can see things here and there. And so, yeah, he is the sounding board at home, but yeah, he's been amazingly supportive. Although, going back to Avanche, I could see him while I'm working up for show jumping, and he's literally just walking around in circles. And I'm like, will you stand still? Because actually you're making me nervous now, because I'm not nervous. But yeah, it's just
but I will be. He was box walking. Come on then, give us one horse in your stable for our listeners to look out for next year.
Oh, no, that's tricky to pick. As a young one, I have a lovely 5-year-old, which is, Elfie's brother. So it's wrong calling him his little brother, because he's probably twice the size of him. But he will be 6 next year, and hopefully we'll aim to take him to 6-year-olds at Lyon. He's a lovely horse for the future. Just as precocious. And yeah, he's Corimiro.
Okay. Perfect.
But yes, I'd have to mention a slightly older one as well. Actually, the horse that I've just been to Lyon on, she will be stepping up to 4-star. And actually, she's been a real interesting one. And it's actually a lovely story. Brett bought her as a 3-year-old in foal. She's actually by the same sire as my lovely Compierre. And she came from the Brightwell Sales as a 3-year-old in foal. And I'd been and looked on the first day, and just because it was the same sire, and we love him. there was no photo, so I pulled her out, and she's a much heavier type than him. So she's a nice mare, conformationally good, all of that, but I thought she's a bit heavier type for me. And then the seller had started saying, oh, it's in foal, and I'd mentally switched off and put her back in the stable. Anyway, the next day they loose jumped and they're giving the same spiel about the being in foal. And Brett said, well, no one's going to bid on her because she's in foal. And if she goes cheap enough, then I'm going to buy her. So here she is. And we got her home, backed her, let her have the foal, and weaned it and cracked on. And I literally did think, well, okay, we're going to produce her a bit and sell her. And she just is such fun to ride. She has the most amazing brain, and she's still here, obviously. She's actually run by a lovely syndicate that have had an awful lot of pleasure out of her, and she was so impressive in Leon, and she's literally just sort of in getting fit for Leon, she's actually leaned up that bit, and she just keeps surprising us. So actually, yes, next year, really, really excited now for her to step up to 4-star and see what she can do. So watch this space.
There you go. That is Avita AP, who won the long format 2-star at Blair. Look, Sarah, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. We really appreciate it. And
well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It has been brilliant. Listeners, we hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be back very soon with more on the Ratings Eventing podcast. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the Ratings Eventing podcast.
Have a wonderful day, everybody, and I look forward to having you back with us soon.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more.
Listeners, we'll speak to you again soon.